Micro motor madness. Scale down, drive big.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's project is one of the most challenging builds I've ever attempted, taking a 1/24th scale diecast Tesla CyberTruck and transforming it into a capable RC crawler. Not just any RC build though, we're aiming for a fully hobby-grade machine with excellent crawling capabilities, scale details, and, because it's a Tesla, some serious speed too. Here's the catch. This CyberTruck isn't some lightweight plastic shell. It's a full metal diecast, and the body alone weighs a whopping 380 grams. That's more than most complete 1/24th RC crawlers weigh in total. Can we turn this beast into an efficient, powerful crawler while maintaining the iconic Cybertruck look? It's a tough challenge, and honestly, we might not achieve all of our goals today. But that's the fun part. This is Cybertruck 1.0, a proof of concept. We'll test it, see what works, and use this experience to create an even better Cybertruck 2.0. Think of it like the automotive industry. We've got the vision, and now it's time to build the prototype. This Tesla Cybertruck diecast cost me just $16, and I picked it up from AliExpress. For that price, you're getting a lot. The metal body is beautifully detailed, complete with a full interior and even working LED headlights and taillights. So, let's get started. To make this a proper RC build, we need to strip it down and reuse the parts that will fit into our final rig. Now comes the tough part, modifying the existing plastic chassis. This thing wasn't meant for RC use, so we've got some serious work ahead. I didn't have an electric saw handy, so I had to get creative. First, I made holes using a hole puncher reamer, and then went at it with cutting pliers, a knife, and even scissors. Yeah, it wasn't pretty. It's definitely not the method I'd recommend, but it got the job done. If you're planning to try something similar, I highly suggest using a small electric saw. It'll save you time and frustration. I'm not going to film all this butchery because it might take a lot of time, but you'll see later what's left of this plastic chassis. After the brutal cutting session, I filed down the edges to smooth everything out. Here's what remains of the disassembled body with all the parts that we will put aside to reassemble at the end of the project. We're keeping the metal body, of course, along with the bumpers, mudguards, pickup bed, and tailgate. We'll also reuse the LEDs for the head and taillights, which will help give it that signature Cybertruck look. The rest will be custom built or adapted from existing RC parts. But as nice as it looks, the challenge lies in its weight. This thing is heavy. At 380 grams, it's going to affect everything, from how it handles on rough terrain to how well we can balance the chassis for crawling. Now that the body's prepped, it's time to work on the heart of this build, the drivetrain and chassis. For this, we're using a Hobby Plus CR18 chassis, which is known for its durability and crawling capability, and even more for its price of $4.40. Otherwise, you can use all 1/18th scale chassis with a wheelbase between 150 and 155 millimeters, like that of the Axial SCX24 Gladiator, or all Hobby Plus CR18P and low CG chassis of the Evo models. All will depend on the gearboxes you want to use, and if you want to keep part of the interior or not. The CR18 gives us a wheelbase of 155 millimeters, which is perfect for our Cybertruck body. Also, for me, it's a budget build. This choice is determined by the fact that I have the suspension links, the transmission, and the axles that can match. These are parts left from other build that I recycle in this one. So all I bought is the 130 motor. Otherwise, by buying all the parts, the project does not exceed the $120. This includes the electronics. It is always wise to start this kind of build when you have leftover parts from upgrades on other rigs. First, we test fit the chassis rails under the body. And right away we hit a problem. The rails are too long, and the shock mount towers are too high. So, we need to shorten both to make everything fit under the low-slung design of the Cybertruck. I masked off the areas to be cut using masking tape, and then went at it with a hacksaw. This part took some patience, but once trimmed down, the chassis will fit like a glove. Next up is the gearbox. We're using the one from the Hobby Plus CR18, which is designed for a smaller 30-size motor. But we've got bigger plans. We want to install a high-speed 130 motor from the FMS FCX24 Smasher, a much more powerful motor that'll give our Cybertruck the speed it deserves. But of course, the motor will not fit perfectly. One of the motor holes can be fixed on the gearbox case, but the other hole will be positioned on the outside. We will address this issue later in the video. Now, we focus on the gears. Firstly, the 30 motor has a 1.5mm shaft, and the 130 motor a 2mm shaft. Secondly, the FMS motor being bigger, its shaft will be much further away from the gearbox mesh, so we will not be able to install an 11-tooth pinion. Finally, last, we have the motor pinion MOD, which is the tooth width. The FMS motor pinion is a 0.5 mod with 16 teeth, and we need a 0.3 mod to match the gearbox gear. More precisely, we need a 24-tooth 0.3 mod. We also had to widen the hole to fit our large pinion through. Adapting the engine to the transmission and vice versa is the most complicated step of this build. That's why I propose a simpler alternative for those who risk getting discouraged. This alternative consists of installing this ready-made gearbox. It's all metal gearing, and it's a direct fitment. It comes with a 50 motor high torque, which is a better alternative to the 30 motor. This option, combined with the FMS electronics, offers an excellent slow crawl. That said, the speed will not be there. Although this transmission is full metal gearing, it comes with brass bushing, but the conversion to ball bearing is simple. You will need two types of bearings, the 3x6 by 2.5 millimeters and the 2.5 by 5 by 2.5 millimeters. You will need 2 for the largest and 6 for the smallest. As you can see in the images, this gearbox assembles directly on the skid plate without complications, because it is a direct fitment. This choice clearly facilitates the build of the Cybertruck and makes this build accessible to all. Now it's time to extract the pinion supplied with our motor to replace it with the right one with the right size. This part should normally go smoothly, and the extraction should be done like a knife on butter. I was all happy to take out my extraction kit. But as usual, it doesn't go as planned. I can't get the plate under the pinion. I get angry and I go back to barbarian mode. I take the first tool that comes to hand to brutalize the pinion, but it still doesn't work. I take a deep breath, and I remember that I have a second extraction kit that I take out to test it. Everything falls into place, I align, and I start to exert pressure for the extraction. Unfortunately, the pinion does not move, but the extractor starts to twist. It looks like it is made of a malleable metal. These kits bought on AliExpress are not worth much in the end. I lose control of the situation, and I rely on my good old wire cutters. I will skin this pinion. I decided to break it, so I put the engine under the bench. Fortunately, it's a soft, brass pinion. I pinch the pinion, I press hard, while closing my eyes, for fear of getting a piece in my eyes, and bing bada boom. It is broken. After removing the stock FMS 16-tooth pinion, we were good to go. Unfortunately, I lost the footage of the motor pinion assembly, but I will show you how I did it. I used a vise that I usually use for this kind of application. I placed the pinion on the motor. Then, I place them in the vise. Then, I take a lead weight, that will serve as a wedge at the back for the motor shaft, and then I exerted pressure on the assembly, while being careful that the motor and its pinion remain well aligned until the pinion fits well in place. Here's the assembled CyberTruck rolling chassis. I will not bore the viewers with the whole assembly process. The idea is to show the parts mounted on the chassis and the reason for these choices. Besides this, those of you who will be tempted to build your own CyberTruck will certainly have better ideas. The interest of this video is to open the way and present the universal constraints related to the wheelbase and the width of the axles to fit this body. Once these two parameters are known, I have the intimate conviction that your talents and imagination far exceed mine. Just let me know so that I can admire your achievements. As you can see, these are the pieces of the chassis rails that needed to be cut to allow the body to be placed on the chassis. The battery tray is the CR18-1. It is a $2.73 kit that contains the battery tray, the servo and ESC mount, the skid plate, and the front and rear bumpers which will not be used. Here I cut another ESC mount in half and installed the two ends as the supports for the magnets and trimmed them to allow the drive shafts to move freely. For the steering, it's an Emax servo with an aluminum servo horn that we installed on the front axle, using the FCX24 servo mount. On the damping side, we have the Injora 40mm built-in spring shocks. The tires are the stock CR24, 46.5mm high by 15 wide. The rims are unbranded 1-inch aluminum purchased on sale on AliExpress for $5. The suspension links are front and rear from the CR18-1s. The front and rear axles are from the RGT Adventure, mounted with CR24 metal diff gears and ball bearing. Let's go into a little more detail on the axles before continuing. I used those of the RGT Adventure on my left hand because I had them in stock. Otherwise, those of the Hobby Plus CR24 on my right can be very suitable. These two types of axles are similar. The diff gears are interchangeable. The length of the axle shafts is different. Those of the CR24 are 2 mm longer, and the axle housings are of a different design. Those of the RGT are more robust, while those of the CR24 are more scale. I'm talking more about these two models of axles, because their width is suitable for our build. The body of the CyberTruck is long but narrow. For example, the axles of the SCX24 would be a little too wide, and in my opinion, for a better scale appearance, the wheels should not protrude too much from the body. For a smoother rotation of the axles, it is important to replace the brass bushings with ball bearings. The bearing sizes for these two models are identical with one difference. In fact, at the steering knuckles level, the CR24 has the particularity of having two different sizes. On the outside, it is a bearing of 3x6 by 2.5 mm, and on the inside of the knuckle, a bearing of 4x7 by 2.5 mm. So, you will need in all for the CR24 axles, 4 bearings, 3x6 by 2.5 mm, and 2 bearings of the size of 4x7 by 2.5 mm. For the RGT Adventure, it's simpler. You only need 6 bearings of 3x6 by 2.5 mm for rear and front axles. The RGT Adventure V2 and Hobby Plus CR24 use the same ball bearing for the axles. Shafts, you will need 4 bearing 4x8 by 3 mm, or 2 for each axle shaft. I almost forgot. You will need 2 more 3x6 by 2.5 mm bearings, 1 for each drive shaft pinion gear that fits inside the axle housings. While the ball bearings fit easily into the rear axle, it's a whole different story for the front axle. Indeed, at the front, there is the dog bone shaft pin, which first prevents the brass bushings in the diff gear from being removed before even being able to insert the ball bearing. You have to find a way to remove the bushings. There is a solution, but it involves some risks. You have to shift the pin a little to one side to allow the bushings to be removed to replace them with bearings. My solution is to place the pin of the shaft axle on a hard surface and to tap lightly on the shaft until the pin rises on one side. Once that's done, all you have to do is replace it and then. In the same way, When the replacement is done, you have to tap a little on the shaft while the pin is pressed against a hard surface on the side that protrudes until it recenters itself. The risk is that the pin becomes loose in its location, and that's no longer stays in place. I take this risk because I have several axle shafts that I can replace in case this happens. Second risk is that the axle shaft twists or deforms because of the small blows, which can easily happen. As a general rule, the gain is not worth the risk. I strongly advise to keep the bushings at the front and not to take this risk. The front and rear drive shafts are from the CR18. For the crawler electronics, it's the FCX 24 Power Wagon ESC and transmitter combo. The ESC is waterproofed with electronic silicon sealing. It is placed on the CR18 servo and ESC mount by cutting the part provided for the servo. Magnets are attached to hex spacers, 8 magnets in total. I bought a magnet kit which comes with its double adhesive tape. By the way, all Hobby Plus and RGT parts are available at Asia Tees. This is for information purposes only. This video is not sponsored. Now, let's tackle the motor mount. As I mentioned earlier, the 130 motor is significantly larger than what the CR24 gearbox is designed for. But we did it! We even managed to mount the motor heatsink because it runs hot and needs to be cooled. We did it by cutting the part that blocks with the gearbox case. I showed you earlier in the video that only one of the motor's mounting holes lined up with the gearbox. I had to get creative for the second hole. Using a 1.5mm thick piece of ABS plastic, I made a custom link for the second motor hole to attach it to the transmission. So the outer hole of the motor is screwed to one end of the ABS plastic, and then I leveled it to the transmission case with a spacer. The other end of the homemade plastic link is fixed to the gearbox using a screw. It's not a perfect solution, but it works. Before locking everything down, we test the motor and the gearbox. We connect the battery, we turn on the transmitter, then the ESC. We run the motor with the transmission case open to see if everything is fine and that the gears are turning well without friction or binding. As you can see, it's running smoothly. This motor is much wider than the 30 motor. He sits lower. It prevents the transmission from going down to be fixed on the skid plate. So we had to raise the whole transmission using a 2mm M2 spacers. We even had to cut a second skid plate to put it on top of the spacers and install the gearbox on top with longer screws. I also filed the skid plate on the motor side to get the right fit. But once everything is in place, the gearing is smooth and the motor is perfectly aligned. I reversed the direction of the transmission installation by reversing the direction of the skid plate, and at the same time, I reversed the polarity of the motor. That's a lot of reversals. Before the assembly of the body and the test drive, we tested on the bench to check that everything turned out as planned. We checked the slow and high speed. We looked carefully if the transmission is well fixed, if the acceleration during direction changes goes well without binding, if there is no blockage or friction somewhere. At first glance, everything seems to be fine. I feel a tiny vibration at the transmission level, but I don't think it has any impact. Overall, it seems pretty good to me for a rig made of cheap parts. We will test it without any consideration, and we will see if it lasts over time and if the parts hold up when they are requested by the power of the engine. Finally, I think it is my least expensive build from scratch in my collection, and I am no less proud of it. Now we're moving on to the final phase, assembling the body and putting it all together. Here is the stripped body ready to receive these components. Here we have the lower body of the car that we cut from the original chassis. It is an important part because it receives the interior and has the attachment points to the body. The interior trim had 3 seats at the front. We removed the one in the middle to make space for the transmission. First, we put the interior trim on the lower body. Then we assemble everything to the body without screwing. We check one last time, making sure everything aligns with the modified chassis before final assembly. We install the taillights in their original location onto the lower skirt of the vehicle. We glue the headlights into place on the front of the body. We prepare the underbody of the car with the interior trim and take the opportunity to clean it and check that everything is well aligned. This time, I think everything is good and ready to finalize the assembly of the body. All that's left is to screw the assembly. The body with all its accessory on the chassis really bring the Cybertruck to life. This part is all about the finishing touches that make it look as close to the real truck as possible. Finally, we're ready for the big moment, marrying the chassis to the body. This step is easy, but requires a little concentration and patience so that the body is placed well-centered on the chassis. Simply peel off the upper side of the double-sided adhesive from all the magnets. Once the chassis is ready, it must be placed on the body delicately, taking marks so that everything is well-centered. Once that is done, I reinforce the magnets that remain stuck to the body using hot glue on the sides of the magnets so that they are doubly glued and no longer move when separating the body from the chassis, especially since the body is very heavy, hence the choice of 8 magnets distributed along the entire length of the vehicle. Launching the Tesla CyberTruck has been a journey filled with highs and lows. After its futuristic reveal in 2019, fans were eager to see this bold, angular beast hit the streets. But the road to production wasn't smooth. Delivery timelines kept slipping, with initial dates pushed back by years. Price adjustments added to the frustrations. What started as an affordable entry price has grown, putting it out of reach for some early hopefuls. Yet, as the first Cybertruck Foundation Series deliveries finally rolled out, the enthusiasm from Tesla fans was undeniable. And just like that, our Tesla CyberTruck is almost ready to hit the trails. But how well does it perform? It's time to see if Cybertruck 1.0 lives up to the hype. First, let's test its speed and agility. As expected, the high-speed 130 motor delivers. It's fast, can handle donuts, and even pulls off wheelies. It is even capable of slow crawling, and that surprises me especially with the high gearing of the 24-tooth motor pinion, which was imposed on us by the choice of the motor. Despite the excitement, since the first weeks of the launch of the Cybertruck, criticisms quickly surfaced. Reports of assembly issues and the truck's high price left some questioning whether it lives up to its hype, not to mention the stainless steel body, which tends to show bits of rust very quickly when exposed to humidity. And the worst of all, which drives most people almost crazy, is the fingerprints left by fingers on the body. The Cybertruck has become a love it or hate it phenomenon. For some, it's an engineering marvel. For others, an overhyped concept that misses the mark on promises. Still, its polarizing design and tech-forward features ensure one thing. The Cybertruck isn't just another truck, it's a statement, sparking conversation and dividing opinions. But let's see on our Savannah course what it is capable of in a crawling situation. Unfortunately, this is where we hit a few snags. While it looks great and moves well on flat terrain, the weight of the body makes it unstable on steeper inclines. The spring-loaded shocks can't handle the load, even with the hardest springs, and the small tires reduce ground clearance, causing the chassis to get stuck on obstacles. While it's not the crawling monster I envisioned, it's still a great first attempt. The scale look is spot on, the speed is there, and it handles decently on rough terrain. But there's room for improvement. For Cybertruck 2.0, we'll focus on weight distribution, better suspension, and larger tires to turn this into a true off-road beast. Overall, I'm really happy with how this build turned out, but we're not done yet. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we'll tackle the upgrades needed to make Cybertruck 2.0 a true crawler. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed what you saw and want to stay updated with all our upcoming content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring the notification bell. This way, you'll be the first to know when we drop new videos. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more exciting content with you. So, subscribe, like, and ring that bell. See you in the next one.